Israeli security officials have said that more hostages could be released as early as today during a temporary truce between Israel and Hamas.
This comes as the first 24 hostages were set free yesterday, including women and children.
Benjamin Netanyahu's office have said that they're reviewing a list of captives who could be freed over the next 24 hours.
Well, joining us now is Israeli journalist Amir Oren. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. So those hostages that have been released, they are being checked over. They are being reunited with their families, and more could be released today, Amir.
Well, it's almost certain, because the deal struck between Israel and Hamas calls for a batch of some 13 Israelis. The other 11, which you mentioned, were Thai and Filipino workers, also captured by Hamas. But each day, for the next 3 days too, and in addition to yesterday, 13 Israelis are to be released in return for Palestinian prisoners being released from Israeli jails. But what is more important for Hamas, a ceasefire, a pause. Now, this has been received with great joy in Israel. The Israeli public has apparently obeyed your own Margaret Thatcher's dictum to rejoice. However, it is quite nonsensical to do it piecemeal. It is much better and perhaps will be adopted to have 130 Israelis in return for a 10-day ceasefire. But this remains to be seen. Right now, the dynamics in Israel is that such a ceasefire is good for the Israeli civilians, while the Israeli military would like a shorter one.
As you say, it's a day for rejoicing, and let's hope there is more rejoicing to be done. But is there mixed feelings as well? You sort of touched upon it there. Is there criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu's government and the way they have handled it, and indeed the deal they have done?
Mixed feelings on two levels. One level is for the hostage families themselves, because they are anxious to find out each evening who is going to be released the next day. But as you say, the most strategic aspect of mixed feelings is that the Israeli military fears that the war will not be resumed, and therefore Hamas will be declared the winner, because it's just like halftime. You mentioned Manchester United versus Liverpool. Here it's much more lethal. But as the teams went off for half-time, Hamas was leading.
Also, Amir, I just wanted to ask you about some of the hostages, the women and children that have yet to be released, because, of course, we saw the videos at the time they were captured. They went viral, and there was one woman, and I think we can show pictures of Shiri Babas. There she is, with her two little boys, Ariel and Kafir, and I think Kafir is only a few months old. And of course, there would have been high hopes that they would have been among the first to be released yesterday. They aren't. Is that part of the psychological game that Hamas plays?
Definitely. Now, Kafir, as you mentioned, was captured when he was 9 months old. Now he is 10 months old. He has spent 50 days in captivity already. And yes, Hamas is doing it in order to torture Israeli decision makers and put pressure on them to extend the ceasefire. Hamas is not going to throw all of its cards on the table immediately. American citizens too, which President Biden hoped will be released, have yet to be released. So yes, it's quite a war of nerves, a war of wits between the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and Netanyahu and Biden.
Can you explain to our viewers and listeners what is the fear of an extended ceasefire? What do you fear Hamas will do?
Not what Hamas will do, and the Israeli Defense Forces will also recuperate and regenerate and refresh its forces during the pause. The fear is that world pressure will not let Israel resume the war at all, and thereby will let Hamas stay in control, at least in South Gaza, while Israel is in control of northern Gaza, and Hamas will be able to launch rockets and terror raids into Israel again, and Israel would not be able to permit that. So the onus will be on the world community, headed by President Biden, to find some deal that will make the ceasefire permanent in exchange for the Hamas leadership leaving Gaza.
We also saw in the last few hours 39 Palestinian women and children, teenagers, being released. Why is it not one for one? Why are there more Palestinian prisoners, hostages being released than there are Israelis, Amir?
Because earlier precedents have already been set that for one Israeli soldier, Israel released more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and the Hamas leadership wanted to show that it is getting at least the equivalent, but this is only the first part of the deal. Those released yesterday were either minors or women held for minor offenses. The greatest chunk and the most unbearable for Israel will be later on in exchange for soldiers kept by Hamas, murderers on death row, even though there is no death sentence in Israel, have to be released. And this will be quite hard for the Israeli public to digest.
It is already, isn't it? Amir, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. And as I say, we all wish for better news throughout the day. But you can see, as you were calling it, what were you calling it? This sort of war of attrition. Psychological warfare, it really is. I know you've been looking at some of the characters that were released yesterday. I mean, the hostages. There was one woman who was taken, and she was 8 months pregnant. And everybody's been wondering what has happened to her. She wasn't one of the ones released yesterday.
I don't think she was.
I don't think she was.
And I think part of the problem as well is they're not just being held by Hamas. They're being held by other militant groups as well. And so I think some people's fear might be, well, do Hamas actually know where every single hostage is that was taken?
One of the older ladies who was released yesterday, everybody, Hezbollah, I think, had said she was dead. Mm-hmm. And all her family have accepted that she was dead because Hezbollah said so. And she wasn't. And she was released yesterday. And so this really is an appalling sort of psychological warfare.
I think that, Anne, is 3 generations of the same family.
Yeah.
There's a grandmother, the mother, and 9-year-old boy released
last night. And I think that video was actually taken by Hamas and released, wasn't it?
That was taken by Hamas and released. So, you know, it is perhaps, you could say, part of their propaganda campaign. But those pictures are of the hostages now, thankfully, in safe hands. And they were taken to the Rafah crossing. And as their vehicles passed by, there was so much cheering from Palestinians as they passed, because for Palestinians, they've got some respite from all this horror.
Yeah. And some of them will be very pleased that last prisoner exchange, hostage exchange is happening, which, I mean, everybody's a human being, aren't they, and have loved ones that they've been worried about.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's what's happening in Israel at the moment. Let's hope there is further good news.